This is part 4 of tonight's program on Opportunity Zones Meetup, where we're talking about competition by and between different Opportunity Zone projects. We're trying to get to the heart of the question of, if you have a project, what can you do to make yourself more attractive to particular investors that are there? And as a case study for tonight, we've been discussing the Opportunity Zone located in Dacono, Colorado, which is about halfway between Fort Collins and Denver on Interstate 25. So with that project in mind, I have a number of questions that we're going to get to. And to join with me in the discussion tonight, I have Ross Hare with Oz, Colorado. Ross has, like myself, been gathering information about opportunity zones and starting to share that information with individuals, investors, communities, and others, particularly in the real estate area, to help them understand what this is all about, to make decisions about whether or not they want to invest in or to start an Opportunity Zone project. And Ross and I have been brainstorming creation of some templates that may be used for residential construction in multiple communities, both urban and rural, anywhere in the United States. They're not geographically specific. And looking at what would be the quickest way to do a 2, 3, or 4 stage funding that would lead to construction of housing. We have found in every community that has an opportunity zone that they have a need for housing. This is partly because their population continues to grow here in Colorado and they're simply outstripping available housing. And then some of the communities have been effective already in recruiting businesses into their backyards, and they have new employees coming into town, and the employers need some new housing for those workers to live in. And so housing is a continuing problem. So then the question is, how can we do a bunch of projects in a hurry? Can we create a template that is reusable and to some degree scalable from 10 houses to 1,000 houses, and we'll see how this works. So we're going to talk about that here. And the first question that we're going to put on the table is, what does it mean to compete as an opportunity zone? So I'll lay that out to you, Ross, and let you take it from there.
Thanks, Carl. So, well, thanks for showing that old photo of me as well, by the way. I lost 10 years of that. That's great, but I still don't have any hair, so that didn't help, right? So I think one of the things we're really looking at around competition is where, and we're looking at Dacono specifically, right? So it's a randomly chose project in this regard. I mean, you'll have your own ideas about where you want to get involved. But it is somewhat unique in that it's kind of well located right on that I-25 corridor. And so when we talk about competition, what you'll find, and in the general reading of what we're seeing, is that within the United States as a whole, Colorado doesn't really register as any of the low-hanging fruit in terms of the large billion-dollar funds that are getting raised right now to do this. And then specifically within Colorado, in terms of the Front Range only, Denver definitely kind of moves the needle a little bit, but Dacono, I don't know who's going to find Dacono, right? It's just not there, except for the one thing about Dacono, which is that it really is smack bang in the middle of progress. So the demographics and particularly the population growth that we're being forecast of, particularly through 2040, is significant, and a lot of it is going to happen moving right up from kind of where we're at the boundary right now in Thornton, I'd say, and it's just going to move north. There's just no doubt about it. And it's going to start moving south in from Fort Collins and the Loveland area. And there's Dacono, which someone described to me as the Tri-Cities with Frederick and Firestone. And there it is.
That's a reach.
Right there. I mean, it's the Tri-Cities, right? So there it is. So in terms of like what's the competition, it's like on a geographic basis, it's kind of nowhere, but it's definitely in the middle of people going somewhere, right? So it has that opportunity attached to it. There's no doubt about it. There is a feeling within the city of Dacono that they're in the right place and that this is their time. They, just like the state of Colorado as a whole through the governor's office, have embraced the Opportunity Zone program. We've seen a number of, significant developments on the state level in Colorado, which we're not really seeing many other such projects elsewhere. So we've definitely got a strong adoption there. Within the actual local regional area, Dacona's in Weld County, and there's a Weld County initiative that's in place now. And that initiative is upstate Colorado, and they're gearing themselves towards economic development within Weld County. They have a number of their own programs attached to this, like the enterprise zones, that kind of stuff. And then within the city of Dacona itself, they really are saying that they're open for business, that they view this as one of the launch platforms for them to really redevelop or revitalize and develop the town itself.
So, with that being said, here's a map of Colorado. Everything in yellow is in an opportunity zone. And quite frankly, I don't think you can even see Dacona on this particular map. And anyone who's investing can look at all these areas. And obviously, you could say that Dacona may have more potential in the short term than something in one of the furthest rural communities of Colorado. But it also doesn't have all the same potential if you're in the land around Mile High Stadium or CU Health Sciences Center in Aurora, where you already have a fairly large population, and we're talking about rebuilding, retrofitting huge communities to accommodate a much denser population around a centerpiece destination that's already in place. So this is the kind of competition we're talking about. There's nothing we're saying bad about Dacona. We're just saying, what would Dacona do being representative of an opportunity zone to make itself stand out and to compete with projects that might be viewed by other people to be in a much, much better situation. So to the point of competition, to me competition means that you are trying to get the funding in the door. And that's part of the equation, because sometimes the funding's not the first thing you're going to do, it's the last thing you're going to do. So when we get to this question, what does it mean to compete? You, as I mentioned in the last section, consider this plot of land in Dacona as a blank canvas. What would you do on that canvas? It's similar to if you bought a software program that is like Word or its equivalent for writing a book. Well, if one of us writes a book, it may have little value. If another person writes a book, it may have great value. If I write the next novel, best-selling novel, it's the same platform, but what you do with that platform is what competition is about. So what can you do with a piece of land to make it stand out? Obviously, it wasn't large enough to be the second Amazon headquarters, so that's off the map temporarily, or at least it may be unless they resolve their issues in New York. I can't help talk about that because it's such an interesting development. So the next question is, how do you differentiate yourself? What can you do to put yourself out there? So Ross, what would you suggest that they might start looking at that would make this a project that is the go-to project in Colorado?
Right, so when we start again with Dacona, they're competing with the two other cities, Frederick and Firestone, to begin with. It clearly seems to be, from speaking to the local brokers, a more friendly environment in Frederick to getting things done within the city, and certainly more experience in getting things done, and that's reflected in the way that growth and development has. When we start to drill down to this individual lot level here, where we're looking at this parcel, it's zone C1 commercial, and speaking to the city of Dacona, they want retail on this lot, right? And even though there is right of use for certain other things under that zoning, as an example, you could put certainly a car dealership, as an example, would be a low impact, low cost way to develop this land. But the city itself really wants retail on this land. So that in itself is going to limit what this particular lot can do. There's certainly all around it, there's competition in terms of the vacant land that's there that we're looking at. The projects that we're seeing around there that have been very successful have been certainly the kind of the light industrial condo developments that are going up. There's one going up just on the west side of I-25 where the big McDonald's is, if you can picture that big sign as you drive by. That's coming out at about $200 a square foot. It's outside of the opportunity zone, but that kind of product, there's a huge pent-up demand for it. So when we talk about what could you do with that piece of land to differentiate it, there are a number of successfully looking projects around it. There's certainly a shortage of condo-type industrial in that area. Of course, that may create problems with the 10-year holding. The developer across the road is in that development is holding a number of units for themselves and selling the rest off, so leasing and selling. But that exact kind of project could certainly move across if that lot and that particular parcel, if the city would approve a light industrial kind of development there. And if not that lot, there's certainly a number of L1 lots right around it, large vacant pieces of land which are just set up and geared and ready to go for exactly those kind of projects.
So yeah, obviously there's clearly some demand that has been growing for time for retail space in this location. And again, you could fill this with retail and the stores may all do well over time because of its location on the highway and close to I-25. But if I'm an investor in New York, I'm like, what do I care about Dacono and a new Starbucks or a new Subway store in Dacono? And that's probably not going to get the job done. So Ross and I were talking beforehand about different things we've seen in other projects that start making them stand out. And one of the things is the live, work, play design is becoming more popular today, where you don't live in the suburbs and then commute 20 miles to a place of work and then commute another 20 miles to a place of entertainment and then back home again. So you're in a 60-mile loop every day to go through what you're going to do. These are often now being combined into a mixed-use property where maybe we could still have the Starbucks store on the first floor. We may have office space on the second floor that could be office condos and still have residential on a third floor. And as long as we're not into height restrictions in this particular community, you can enfold all these different features and functions into the same property, and it makes it more dense. It can create more revenue as a consequence. But even there, you're still not making it totally distinctive. You're simply now differentiating from a strip mall. So you say, we're not going to build a retail strip mall here. We're going to do something more. We're going to try to make it where people want to live above and around where they work, which will create its own enhancement to the project and potentially create more development, so there's more to sell and there's more revenue from that. But even there, I think you're still going to fall short. One of the things that we talked about with Julio's program earlier this year had to deal with the concept of innovation hubs. And with an innovation hub, what you're actually engaging in is private economic development. You're going to give a theme to your particular development so that there is a reason for people to find a nexus or an association with everybody else that's in that particular project. So if we were to pick a technology out of the air, such as artificial intelligence or blockchain, and say, we want everybody in this complex to somehow have a close relationship to the industry of blockchain, then we would intentionally recruit in tenants who would be in this field using blockchain technology or advancing platforms, something along that line. We'd be recruiting workers into this area who would work for those particular companies. We'd be recruiting training programs to make sure everybody's up to speed and remaining at state of the art. And we may have some other infrastructure issues that we would build into this. We might have to have gigabyte capacity coming to the building so that everybody could take full advantage. We would want, what's it called, I'm trying to remember what the term is, fifth generation HTML, which allows you to do continuous data broadcast, which is necessary for autonomous cars and other types of things. So now we're saying, let's create a theme. Let's make this a theme park. So are we going to this because we want to be there, and because we want to be there, other people want to be there, and this is going to give us a focus. This is going to give us a way to differentiate ourselves, and it can actually augment the amount of development we do and the amount of revenue that we may generate from this particular project.
Right, I mean, if you really break that down, you can have multiple opportunity zone opportunities built into the one. You have a real estate play, which of course would be the physical structure that you would put in there. The innovation hub or the incubator that you'd put in there would give you an opportunity to launch a number of sort of fast-growing, fast-start tech-based companies, be it AI or and certainly any tech-based startup right now. We know that we have that kind of population around here, right? It's been attracted to the Front Range in Colorado. The access in and out is easy. Once you start talking about job generation like that, you now have the full backing of the city, and that the local municipality is going to come on board. They have a business incentive program in place where they will then start to assist and facilitate you around things like tap fees and sewage fees and rebates on city services, that kind of stuff. They have their programs in place. They have that in place on the county level again, and of course we have that in place on the state level. The enterprise zones actually doesn't touch on this parcel, but it is. There are two parcels immediately around it where it does touch, right?
Right, and this is another that's interesting that you talk about this. We've talked about opportunity zone funding, great. But you may need seed funding, you may need classical funding to get to a point where you can raise opportunity zone funding. But if you really want to stand out again, go find another 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 different programs that complement, bring other money in that could be cheaper. You might work with EB5 International Investment. You might work with here with the USDA community grant that allows you to build a meeting center in this community and pay for it with that grant rather than it coming out of the developer's pocket. You've got the CPACE program for environmental upgrades, which I can't recall as well. Did they sign into that or not?
I'm not sure.
Okay. The Jumpstart program, which again is county by county opt-in, might be something that would work here if you've got the right businesses. And then again, as you mentioned, you're doing it in stages and in tiers. So you build out the infrastructure maybe with Opportunity Zone Fund number 1, then you get into the vertical building and of each of the buildings there, and those might be individual Opportunity Zone projects where each tenant is raising their own money to put up their own building. You may have common infrastructure issues, so you could put a solar farm in connection with all the roofing in this area as yet another project to the side. And now this is becoming a cluster of opportunity zones which are each raising money, but they're vertical, which can match up better with certain investors who are not generic, but they have their own preferences. And they can find what they're looking for in this cluster that matches up with what they need. And as a group, they're all complementary. So it really becomes an interesting play to say that we're going to become a center of excellence on this particular area. We want to be a player for 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road and move from a distressed economic community to a superior economic community.
And you know, and if you really think about it, if you had, let's say, 10 serious players, they really should all get together and pick a spot, one of the zones, and all go in there, because everything they do, their pooled resources will uplift that entire zone just as a natural kind of byproduct of what they're doing. And because this is a 10-year hold, I mean, this is a long-term play. This is patient investment. You've got to sit in there for a while, right? So you may as well do that. And at the same time, by pooling that way, you really are creating something that will attract and create a whole life and momentum of its own anyway, right? So, I mean, certainly a area like Dacono is a wide open canvas for something like that, although it certainly doesn't have what you need right now.
Well, yeah, so there's some great stories about Stone Soup and how you go about making something out of nothing, a classical entrepreneurial bootstrap approach. Right. But if you have this property, it's actually a great canvas. It's a great starting point because of its location and its potential. And it's just a matter of what kind of creativity can we bring to play in the design, what kind of partners can we bring together to create this small army that's working together collaboratively to make this happen. So to get to we've done that one. Let's kind of talk about all the different players in an Opportunity Zone project and what individually they might do to help make this project come forward. So we start off first with the person who owns the property. Now, currently the owner is looking to sell the property to someone else. So it's currently his responsibility, but he's looking to make it the responsibility of whoever manages this project. But what still could this person do to make this more attractive?
Well, you know, when we start with the owner of the land as an example, there's, first of all, of course, he wants to sell it right now if it's listed and for sale. But there's definitely a way to structure a transaction where he stays in the transaction, where he stays within the 20% related party rule as an example, and so there can be a long trailer kind of involvement, which would obviously help with the financing, the funding, and the capital raise that would go with a project like this, right? So certainly there's the owner involved there, and certainly, you know, any kind of, let's call it in terms of the transaction, that would assist in helping everybody tick the boxes on the opportunity zone transaction itself would be extremely helpful in a transaction like this.
Yeah, so one is the seller might rethink how they're going to sell the property. Instead of doing a cash out total picture, they might do some owner carry. They might roll the property into another project. As we talked about, under opportunity zone laws, a current property zone owner may not hold more than 20% of an opportunity zone project or business. But if you're going to put in enough money to build this out, the ratios will work themselves out on the large projects. And so he may actually be able to sell this in a way where he can realize capital gains and roll those over into the project and himself participate in the tax incentives that opportunity zones provide. The guy quite possibly is well connected in the city of Dacono, might be on the city council, might be one of the commissioners, and be in a position to bring political influence to overcome any obstacles that might occur during the development process, maybe deal with some zoning tweaks or things along the way, and may also know other people in the community who can help get behind this. So the seller can play a much more important role than some people might think in getting this project started and letting it get some traction and get moving.
Right, and just the mere fact that that property is now in an opportunity zone, I mean, creates an opportunity for a premium on the sale price of that property for that seller. You know, so you'll hear it right now, the words will come up, oh, it's in an opportunity zone. So you're starting to hear that. Most people don't really know what that means, and there's definitely still a lot of doubt as to how it's all going to work, etc. But there's an awareness that this might impact value. And certainly if you put a trailer into it where there's a little bit of owner carry or something to that effect, there really is a potential long-term benefit where it really could be just the premium of the transaction that the seller leaves in the transaction, right?
Yeah. So then we move to the fund. Right now, the way the law works is if you have a capital gain, you're required to take the cash and invest that cash into an opportunity zone fund. The fund in turn will invest it into a business or into a property. So the fund can be a very simple, minimalistic organization that simply serves to pass through the money from the investors to the subject property or business that's ultimately going to put that money to use. Or the fund can be an operational company. In certain real estate projects, they're going to do all the operations within the fund. In addition to raising the money, they're going to spend and deploy the money. But because of the rules on allocation and time to put money to work, what we're seeing is almost everybody is passing money through a fund to a business where they have a longer time period in which to deploy the money, and it gives them more flexibility on what's spent within the zone and outside of the zone to make that happen. But as a fund, you know, what could the fund do to make itself more attractive to the investors? What would you see it doing to stand out?
Yeah, so I mean, so the fund, and so first of all, not all funds are going to be equal. There's no question about that. In fact, I think it's going to be a little bit of a wild west as to how things will be structured, how they'll be set up, what management fees some of the more sophisticated funds will take. I mean, it really is going to vary. The exit strategies, as an example, I'm fascinated to see how they will all be presented and worked out. But the fund itself can definitely set it up in a way to make it as easy as possible, to be as flexible as possible on a lot of these transactions that will happen. And particularly the way that it's set up and structured will be very important. And, I know kind of like if we want to call it a mom and pop level, there'll be a number because of the ease of registering a qualified opportunity fund, right? It's basically just an election on a single member, single asset fund. So this could be an individual investing into one piece of real estate as an example. It would be relatively simple. Of course, once other people get involved, and once other people's money in particular gets involved, we enter into a whole other world of securities, and that's going to become very important as well.
Yeah. So some of the funds we've been talking to have not been actually formally taking possession of the money. So the investors into the fund are signing commitment letters that say, we're interested in putting our money into your fund as soon as you're ready to deploy it. We know that the 6-month clock is ticking because once you recognize your capital gain, you have 6 months in which to put it into an Opportunity Zone fund in order to qualify. But during this 6-month window, we may see some investors go sign letters of commitment with multiple funds just to hedge their bets. But what will happen then is the fund will find a project and set the stage to deploy the money. Now, once the fund receives the money, they have another 6 months before they have to put it into a business or a property. But they have to make that deployment they have to take the money. Right. And they have to know they have a project lined up, or otherwise they're doing kind of a blind pool, and they're hopeful they'll find a project before their time runs out. So one is a fund can allow for commitment letters. It can create flexibility on when the money has to come in. The fund can be aggressively pursuing multiple projects to assure that all the money that's committed can move through the fund on time and gain the full advantage of the Opportunity Zone. And then, as Ross was just pointing out, 10 years down the road, the fund has to get the money back so it can cash out 10 years or more down the road, depends on what you want to do. The fund has to get the money back so that people can actually realize the benefit of these tax gains. And getting out 10 years down the road may not be that simple. If you've invested in 10 different projects that are all moving at different speeds with different business cycles, it may be difficult to cash out one project and the next one all in the same time period. The other thing is we may find that investors 10 years down the road have decided they don't want out right now. They say, well, at 10 years it looks good, and I'm assuming I want my money out at 10 years, but what if the economy's not where I want it to be, or now's a bad time to sell the property because market prices might depress for one reason or another? Maybe I want to hang it another 5 years. So right now, Opportunity Zone investments can go out to 2046. And so because of that, there may be options built into the structure of the fund to give the investor more flexibility on when they come out, so they can do a little bit of timing in their own investment on the backside. And then another thing that's come up off and on in discussion, and it depends upon the project, the investors are getting a deferral of their capital gains tax till 2026, but they really don't want to pull their money out till 2029 or later now. And so they're going to have a tax payment that they're going to have to make in 2026. Some of these projects are generating ordinary income and will have enough cash they can distribute to the investors to take care of that particular tax liability, but some of them don't. Again, depending on how the fund is structured and how the underlying investment goes. So some attention to payment of that tax hit in 2026 should also be designed into the fund to make it more attractive.
Right, and I think also, simply because you have the basis and the capital gain coming out of a lot of real estate transactions, the basis basically becomes available to the investor, and the capital gain will get reinvested into the fund. And so proper planning with that basis can obviously accommodate that tax event, which will come at the end of 2026 as an example, and of course, and how income is going to be distributed, if there is income, and how it will be distributed, and whether or not the fund will roll over itself in terms of other investments through the indirect corporate structures it has.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of funds where the underlying business may be rolling in and out of properties over time, which may cause issues if you have pass-through tax entities. So once you go beyond the simple model, we strongly recommend that you have good tax advice helping you understand how this might work. Because if you sell one property and put it into another property, you're looking at probably restarting the clock as it now stands for that investment if it comes out at the investor level, the fund level. If it's occurring within the business, it's just engaging in ordinary activities, and it's not a problem.
You know, and I think one of the larger, more well-known of the real estate crowdfunding platforms out there have basically come out and said strategically we are only going to offer single asset funds, so they'll invest into a single asset. And they've created a secondary market effectively to acquire or to buy out those investors that wish to be acquired or bought out. So one of the major unknowns that we have here is we don't know in 10 years' time what the market's going to be. Will there be a flood of similar type projects available in the market? These funds they're not liquid in and of themselves, so it's really the underlying asset base and how will that be dealt with. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. So the larger funds, especially the larger real estate crowdsourcing funds, are really paying attention to that right now, and it's a major part of their competitive difference in saying this is why you should trust us.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest distinction is that the more sophisticated the fund design, the more options it allows for, the more flexibility that's in that fund, both on coming into it and exiting from it, is going to make those far more attractive than a very simple, straightforward, single trick pony type of a fund. So then we get down to, what should the opportunity zone business or property do to differentiate itself, to make itself more attractive?
Yeah, so this is a difficult one, but really, more than anything, I really think you need to just work with the local authority, particularly in an area like Dacono as an example. You really need to, just speaking to the local real estate commercial brokers around there, you're not going to get to tell them what you want to do in this kind of thing. You really want to work closely with them and kind of meet their goals of community development, of jobs. You want to meet their goals specifically around economic development, and you definitely want to have some kind of social impact here. And if you do so, there are a lot of additional benefits that naturally will flow from that. So it's, there are benefits attached to it. So in terms of the property itself, I know it sounds a little silly, but in a place like Dacono, you kind of almost need to do what it is that they want you to do there just to make it work. I know that sounds a little silly.
No, but I agree with you. In talking with all the, I'll say, longtime developers, the shift from a build and sell model, which is 2, 3, 4, 5 years at most, to a build and hold and then sell after 10 years is causing a complete rethinking of everything along the path, because it's like a more classical investment where you put the money in and you cross your fingers that when you get ready to exit that it has a higher value. Well, in the design of these businesses, in the construction of these offerings, you really are saying, what can I do so that I peak not in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, but how do I peak 10 to 20 to 25 years down the road so that there is an ongoing market ready to receive this property at a high value so I get my best return. And that requires investing in your community, doing more things that are collaborative and integrative with the people within the community, and becoming part of the economic development team rather than an isolated project sitting out here by itself.
Right. And again, the pooling of projects, attracting similar projects to the area, and that pooling of resources, and I think is going to be essential in a smaller area like Dacono. Putting at this particular lot as an example, putting a retail development on there right now is really risky, right? You're going to build it and see if the traffic actually stops and comes in there, right? Because right now, Dacono is not somewhere that you stop. I mean, you drive right by it. Right?
Yeah, so, drive by, fly by.
Yeah. So you really need to this really in that kind of zone you really need to make sure that you're involved with the community, and particularly the local authority on that.
Yeah, so, and that's where, yeah, you're going to want to talk to the adjacent landowners, you're going to know the city, you're actually going to want to talk to the adjoining cities, you want to know what the county's doing, and you are becoming part of the fabric of the economic development team. And I think that of all the aspects of the opportunity zones, this is, in my mind, the most compelling. It's causing land developers to go long-term, to think, well, I want insulation in that building because I'm going to be paying the utility bills for 10 years. I want something that's going to cause the building to go up over time instead of it becoming somebody else's problem down the road. I don't want to be paying high maintenance fees throughout the entire 10-year cycle, so I may put in a higher grade of plywood, or I may use a different type of material in order to reduce that. And now I'm also thinking at a community level, because the community is actually what's going to make this property resilient and grow in value over time. So I've got to put on some additional hats and think about this from the community perspective.